All right, so elections are coming up next week. And to help everyone get informed, we're doing a deep dive into the life and policies of Donald Trump. We're not here to tell anyone what to think, but we want to make sure you have the information so you can make informed decisions when you vote. This deep dive is all about understanding the man who has really reshaped American politics.
It's wild how Trump's journey,
Yeah.
from real estate to the political world, it's also tied up with his brand and how you've used success.
Totally. So let's go back to the beginning. His story starts in Queens, New York. He went to the New York Military Academy, then Fordham University, and he ended up graduating from the Wharton School of Finance. Even in his early life, you can see that mix of discipline and business smarts.
It's interesting. Trump often talks about the business world as like a test, a place that separates winners from losers. He even compares it to golf, saying that champion golfers have a different mindset, a different way of approaching the game. And this whole idea of winners, it's super important to understanding him and how he operates in the world.
So how did that play out in his early business stuff? Everyone knows Trump Tower, but his empire was so much bigger than that.
Right. Casinos, hotels, golf courses. He even had an airline for a while. It was all about building that brand, an image of luxury and success, even if things behind the scenes weren't always so perfect. And that's the key thing here. He brought that same branding strategy to politics.
He never hid that businessman side of him, but he actually makes a distinction between succeeding in business and succeeding in politics. Right?
Exactly. He's even talked about successful business people who completely failed in politics
Yeah.
because they couldn't hold the attention of a big audience.
It's like he saw politics as another deal to make, another audience to win over.
Yeah, kind of. He believes that politicians, just like CEOs, need to be able to connect with huge crowds, to use public speaking and media to their advantage, to really get through to people. It's not enough to just have policy positions. It's about performance, about presenting a certain image.
Which leads us to his shift into politics. People forget that Trump wasn't always a hardcore Republican. He started as a Democrat and sort of navigated the political world before becoming the Republican we know.
Yeah, his strong opinions on things like trade and immigration, those were early signs of where his politics were headed.
So how did his business background and this developing political identity, how did they all come together?
Well, Trump thinks that politicians, just like CEOs, need to be able to make tough decisions, decisions that might not be popular. But he also thinks they need to sell those decisions to the public. And that's where that whole focus on captivating an audience comes in.
This sets the stage perfectly for his presidential campaigns in both 2016 and 2020, and maybe even now. He used a very unconventional approach, some might say disruptive. It's like he went after a very specific group of voters, tapping into their worries about the economy, about immigration, and about America's place in the world.
And it's important to understand, he didn't just acknowledge those anxieties. He often made them bigger, giving a voice to people who felt ignored by the political establishment. He became the outsider, the one who could shake things up.
He even said directly that his stance on immigration was a big reason he won in 2016. He even goes as far as to say that the situation at the border is way worse now
Yeah.
than it was when he was president.
It just shows how good he is at framing things in a way that his supporters really respond to. He makes himself the solution to the problems he points out, whether those problems are real or just perceived.
So let's talk about his core policies. Let's start with the economy. Trump has always been a champion of tax cuts,
Yeah.
deregulation, and an America-first approach to trade deals.
It's a very nationalistic approach, putting American interests first, even if it means challenging traditional alliances or global trade agreements. That message really connected with people who felt left behind by globalization and economic change.
And we see that America-first idea in his foreign policy, too, where he often questioned the value of traditional alliances and agreements. It seems strength and acting alone, without relying on allies, are central to how he sees the world.
And this ties directly into his law and order platform, with strong support for law enforcement and a hard stance on crime. It all feeds into that image of strength and decisive action that he projects.
He's not exactly known for avoiding confrontation, is he?
Right.
He often says his aggressive rhetoric is just a response to attacks against him. He's even labeled his critics as having Trump derangement syndrome, right?
It's a tactic that lets him dismiss any criticism as irrational, as coming from some kind of obsessive hatred, rather than genuine concerns about his policies or behavior.
Effective, but definitely divisive. Okay, let's talk about his accomplishments. He did manage to get some important laws passed, like the tax cuts and deregulation bills, and he appointed a lot of judges, all of which have had lasting impacts.
These accomplishments are important to his supporters. They prove that he can deliver on his promises, even in a system that he says is corrupt and broken.
Right. And his impact on the economy is complicated. There was growth and job creation when he was president, but also rising deficits. It's a mixed bag, depending on how you look at it.
And that's where his ability to shape the narrative comes in. He often highlights the good parts of his economic record, while downplaying or ignoring any negative trends.
He also claims that his administration brought peace and stability to the world, pointing to the fact that there were no new wars during his term, and his role in defeating ISIS.
Whether you agree with him or not, it's clear that Trump sees himself as a peacemaker, a deal maker who can bring about stability through strength and negotiation. He even likes to quote Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, who said the world needs Trump back because everyone was afraid of him.
It plays into that image
Ah,
of the tough, unpredictable leader who commands respect, even if it's partly through intimidation. And let's be honest, he's mastered the media, especially social media.
Oh, absolutely. Trump has used social media as a weapon, like no politician before him. He understands branding, creating short, powerful messages that bypass traditional media and go straight to his supporters.
His use of Twitter, and now his platform Truth Social, which he calls his typewriter, has been incredibly influential, even if it's also been a source of constant controversy.
He even admits that reposting stuff on his platform sometimes gets him in trouble, but he insists that his words have been powerful and effective. There's no denying he's changed how politicians communicate and engage with the public, for better or worse. It's amazing how he's built this image of being authentic, of just
Right.
telling it like it is, even though he's become this global figure. But you have to remember, it's a very carefully crafted image, one that's been incredibly successful in building a loyal following.
You're right. And it's that image, as much as his actual policies, that has caused so much controversy. He's been accused of everything, from racism and sexism to corruption and abuse of power. His words can be very inflammatory. He's often acted in ways that go against traditional presidential behavior.
But for his supporters, those same qualities are often seen as strengths. They see his bluntness as honesty, his defiance as strength, and his willingness to break the rules as a sign that he's not part of the swamp, that he's not stuck in the same corrupt system as other politicians.
It's like they're rooting for the disruptor, the outsider, who's there to shake things up, even if it means upsetting people along the way. But that disruption has come with a cost, there's no doubt. The Trump's presidency, and even his continued presence in American politics, has made the divisions in this country deeper.
And this is where we have to really think about the more troubling aspects of his legacy. His rhetoric has, at times, fueled a rise in hate speech and intolerance, and his actions have emboldened some extremist groups, whether he meant to or not. He's created a climate where these forces feel more empowered.
And his attacks on the media, calling them fake news and the enemy of the people, have eroded trust in one of the most important parts of a functioning democracy. This isn't just about hurt feelings. It has real consequences. It makes it harder to have real conversations and to find common ground on important issues.
It's a dangerous trend, and one that we're still dealing with as a country. It's created a situation where even basic facts are disputed and where people retreat into their own echo chambers, just reinforcing their own beliefs and demonizing anyone who disagrees with them.
It's almost like we've lost the ability to even agree on what's real, on what's true, and that makes it incredibly difficult to have productive conversations about how to solve the very real problems our country is facing.
You're absolutely right. And this is why it's so important to look at Trump's legacy and his potential impact on the future with a critical eye. It's not about blindly accepting or rejecting everything he says or does. It's about carefully examining his policies, his words, and his actions, and thinking about the potential consequences, both good and bad.
So let's dig into some specifics. You mentioned earlier that Trump claims he could have prevented the war in Ukraine. What exactly is his solution?
Well, he's been a bit vague on the details, but he suggests that his strong relationship with Putin, which he talks about a lot, would have stopped Russia from invading in the first place. He also hints that he'd be willing to negotiate with Putin, though he hasn't really said what those negotiations would look like.
But he's been very critical of how the current administration is handling the war, saying that their weakness emboldened Putin.
Yeah, and this goes back to his core belief that strength is the most important thing in foreign policy. He believes that projecting strength, even through military force, is the best way to prevent aggression and maintain peace. It's a worldview that's very skeptical of things like multilateralism and diplomacy, and it shapes how he approaches a wide range of foreign policy issues.
We see this in his stance on China, too, right? He's been very critical of China's trade practices, and its growing influence in the world, and he's pushed for a more confrontational approach.
Exactly. He sees China as a strategic rival, even an enemy, and he believes the U.S. has to take a hard line to protect its economic and security interests. Think back to the tariffs he put on Chinese goods, his attempts to limit Chinese investments in the U.S., and his challenges to China's territorial claims in the South China Sea.
And those actions have definitely had an impact. They've increased tensions between the two superpowers and raised concerns about a possible trade war or even a military conflict.
It's a high-stakes game, and one that requires careful thought about the potential consequences. Trump's supporters say his tough stance is necessary to stand up to China and protect American interests, while his critics worry that his aggressive approach is unnecessarily provocative and could lead to a dangerous escalation.
It's a difficult balance to find, and it's one of the biggest challenges for any U.S. administration, no matter who's in charge. So let's switch gears a bit and talk about Trump's views on immigration, which have been a central part of his political platform from the very beginning.
This is one area where he's been very consistent. He's always advocated for strong border controls, reduced legal immigration, and a crackdown on undocumented immigrants. He's consistently framed immigration as a threat to American jobs, security, and even culture, appealing to voters who feel threatened by demographic and cultural changes.
He's taken some pretty drastic actions to try to achieve his immigration goals, right?
Right.
Like the border wall,
Yeah.
the family separation policy,
Hi.
and the travel ban on citizens from several Muslim-majority countries.
Yes, and these actions have been incredibly controversial, leading to legal challenges, protests, and accusations of human rights violations. But they have also been popular with his base, who see them as proof that he's willing to take strong action to address a problem they feel is being ignored by the political establishment.
It's a complicated issue. And as we head into another election, where immigration is likely to be a big topic, it's something we're thinking about. How have Trump's views on immigration shaped the national conversation? And what are the potential implications for the future?
That's a question each of us needs to consider. Now let's dive into some of the specific policies Trump has proposed, both during his presidency and in his potential run for re-election. When we talk about Trump-specific policies, his economic policies really stand out. He's a huge fan of tax cuts, especially for corporations and high earners. He says this boosts economic growth because it encourages investment and job creation.
He often points to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017.
Yeah.
That bill lowered corporate tax rates a lot and changed individual income tax brackets.
And that's where the debate gets heated. Supporters say it led to more business investment and boosted overall economic activity. But critics argue it mostly helped the wealthy and made the gap between rich and poor even bigger. It's a conversation that's tied to bigger questions about the government's role in regulating the economy and ensuring fairness.
It's interesting how tax cuts often become such a central point in these discussions. But it's not just about taxes, is it? Trump has also been a big advocate for deregulation. He says too many government regulations hurt businesses and slow down economic growth.
He's targeted all kinds of regulations, from environmental protections to financial oversight. He often frames it as a battle between businesses trying to create jobs and burdensome bureaucracy. This resonates with a lot of people in the business world who see regulations as unnecessary obstacles. But it's also raised concerns about potential downsides for things like public health, safety, and the environment.
It's a classic back and forth between different interests. And as long as regulations are being made or taken away, that debate is likely to continue.
Speaking of competing interests, we can't forget about trade. It's been another key area for Trump. He's been very critical of existing trade deals, saying they've hurt American workers and caused jobs to move overseas.
His America First trade policy is all about being willing to impose tariffs, renegotiate agreements, and even pull out of long-standing partnerships, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This approach has definitely shaken up global trade and created uncertainty for businesses. But it's popular with people who believe that the U.S. hasn't been treated fairly. In past trade deals, trade is definitely a complex issue, with impacts felt all over the world. It's going to be a major sticking point in any future trade negotiations. But moving beyond the economy, Trump has put forward ideas on a wide range of topics, from healthcare to education to energy.
On healthcare, he's repeatedly promised to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and replace it with something else, though he hasn't presented a detailed alternative yet. He's also talked about lowering drug prices and giving patients more control over their healthcare choices. But his specific proposals haven't been met with a lot of support in the healthcare industry.
When it comes to education, he's been a supporter of school choice, saying parents should have more options for where to send their kids. including charter schools and private schools. He's also called for more vocational training and apprenticeships to better prepare students for the workforce.
And on energy. He's been a strong supporter of fossil fuels. He's rolled back environmental regulations and encouraged increased production of oil, gas, and coal. He sees this as a path to energy independence and economic growth. But it puts him at odds with people who want to switch to renewable energy sources to fight climate change.
As you can see, Trump's policy proposals cover a lot of ground, and they've definitely sparked debate and controversy. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny that his ideas have had a major impact on the national conversation, and they're likely to continue shaping American politics for years to come.
It's really important for all of you as voters to think carefully about these proposals, weigh the potential pros and cons, and be part of informed discussions
Yeah.
about the direction you want to see for the country. We're living in a time of huge change and uncertainty, and the decisions we make today will have lasting effects for generations to come.
So much to think about as we head to the polls. This deep dive has given us a look at the complex and fascinating figure of Donald Trump, his rise to power, his core beliefs, and the potential impact of his policies.
We've explored his unconventional journey, his masterful use of media and branding, and the controversies that have followed him. We've seen how he's tapped into people's worries about the economy, immigration, and America's place in the world, positioning himself as the leader with the answers.
We've also examined the possible outcomes of his policies, both the good and the bad, and highlighted how important it is to think critically, have informed discussions, and carefully evaluate the facts. At the end of the day, whether you agree with him or not, his impact is undeniable.
This deep dive has hopefully sparked your interest and inspired you to learn more. Remember, it's crucial to do your own research, question your own assumptions, and have respectful conversations with people who have different viewpoints. The future of our nation depends on our collective wisdom and our ability to find common ground, even when we disagree.
Your vote is your voice.
Yep.
Make it count. And if you want to really understand how Donald Trump sees the world, you can check out his books, Crippled America, and keep an eye out for his upcoming book, Save America. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.